Seniwa de dende, seniwa de dende, seniwa de dende, seniwa.
The Twin Ashanti Princesses and the Royal Drum. Written by Agnes Jening Asiedu. Illustrations, Bina Arts. Read by Abna Dapa. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, in a big kingdom called Ashanti Kingdom, there lived two beautiful princesses called Panin and Kakra. They were twins and were called Panin and Kakra for short. They lived with their father, a powerful king called King Jan, their mother, and their brother. The princesses loved their father's kingdom very much. It was big, rich, and beautiful. They liked many things about the kingdom. For instance, every morning the birds would tweet, tweet, tweet. The cocks would crow, coo, coo, coo. The goats would bleat, the pigs would grunt, oink, oink. The ducks would quack, quack, quack. Then all the other animals would join in until they formed a sweet medley. Panin and Kakra also loved how the sun would rise slowly and sleepily until it formed a big golden ball in the sky. They loved how the sleepy flowers would stir and bloom at the light of the sun, all red and blue and green and yellow and orange and purple and all the wonderful colors one could ever imagine. And how the butterflies would flit and fly about in their beautiful array of colors, pink and blue, red and white, green and yellow. Such lovely butterflies as existed in that kingdom, and the lovely rainbow that would form after a heavy rainfall. They loved the grass cutters and squirrels, and monkeys and deer, and elephants, and lions and hippos, and rhinos and leopards, and snakes and antelopes, and giraffes, and every other animal you could ever imagine. Even at night, the shiny moon was a sight to behold, and you should have been there to see how many fireflies they had in that kingdom. They loved their beautiful kingdom indeed. Chapter 2. There was only one thing that the girls did not like about the kingdom. The women and girls were not an important part of it at all. They were only expected to fetch water, look after the home, and take care of the children. Nobody called them when it was time to make decisions, and no one expected them to be brave at all. They were also expected to look beautiful during festivals, as if they were just ornaments. It was the same thing in the girl's father's palace. The king and the prince were the most important people in the palace and in the whole kingdom. Aside from them, the next most important people were the chiefs who helped the king to rule the kingdom. Then all the other men followed in that order. No one cared about the queen and the princesses. It was as if they did not exist. Also, there were three very important objects in the kingdom. The first of these was the royal stool. The people believed that they got their power from the stool. The next was the king's sword. The people believed that the sword helped them to win their many wars. Then there was the king's drum. It was the most beautiful drum in the whole kingdom, and it was played during important festivals. Chapter 3. In another kingdom not too far off from the Ashantis lived an evil dwarf king and his subjects. The dwarf king was very jealous of the Ashanti king. He wished his kingdom was as beautiful as that of the Ashantis. However, this was not so. Rather, the dwarf kingdom was poor and messy, and their king was not a good leader. The people were always hungry, dirty, and sick. They did not take good care of their forests, animals, and rivers. In fact, the kingdom was full of thieves and all sorts of bad people. The dwarf king was so jealous of the Ashanti king that it made him sleepless at night. He had staged many wars against the Ashantis, but had always lost. He knew that the Ashanti king's powers were in the stool, the sword, and the drum. "I must have these 3 items by hook or crook," he said to himself one day. "Fancy how big and important and powerful I would be if I could have them all." Chapter 4. One fine day, the girl's father held a big festival in his town to celebrate the New Yam Festival. The king brought out his tool, his sword, and his drum and showed it to the people. This was something he usually did during every New Yam Festival. All the 3 objects were covered in gold. There was so much gold that over 100 big and tall men were chosen to protect them during the festival. Many kings from different kingdoms came to the Ashanti kingdom to celebrate with the king. They brought many gifts to him. The dwarf king also came to the festival. He came with over 100 tiny men. They hadn't even been invited. When Panin and Kakra saw the tiny men approaching, they gave a small startled shout. "Oh God! Isn't that the dwarf king?" they asked. "We must warn father at once." And they ran off to warn the king. "Father," they said, panting and almost out of breath, "the wicked dwarf king is here with many tiny men. Isn't he our enemy? Should we allow him into our land? Don't you think we should get our most powerful men to throw them out?" "Hush," their father said, looking around to make sure that no one had heard his girls. It was a bad thing for the girls to advise the king. "What do you know?" he asked angrily. "All you are supposed to do is to look pretty and smile. No one wants to hear your voice. Hush! Away with you two." He sounded harsher than they had ever heard him. But the girls tried to argue, but their father shook his head angrily and said again in an even harsher tone, "Away with you two now! Since when did you become my advisors? I'm not afraid of those dwarf things. I will squash them dead with my feet if they cause any trouble. Off you go and be good women like your mother." So the girls went back to their seats with shamed faces. Chapter 5. The girls were right. Of course, the dwarf king had an evil plan. He asked his men to find where all the drinks for the festival were and pour some sleeping potion in them. Remember, only men were expected to drink, as it was only for the most important people in the kingdom. "Don't worry about the women," the dwarf king told his men. "The women and girls in this kingdom are silly." He encouraged his men to put more sleeping potions in the calabash of every man at the festival. that would make the potion even more powerful. So his warriors did just that. Remember that dwarfs are tiny people, so they could get into even the tightest of corners. They sneaked their way in between people's legs as they poured more sleeping potions in the men's drinks. Actually, they were quite a nuisance, but the Ashanti people did not want to spoil the beauty and joy of the day by throwing them out of the festival grounds. By midnight, all the men in the royal palace and all the warriors were feeling very drowsy. They began to fall asleep on their feet. As soon as all the men began to fall asleep, the dwarf king yelled angrily at his men. "This is the time to act," he said, shouting at his men who had begun to enjoy the celebration that they forgot what they were there to do. "How silly you all are," he shouted angrily. "Quick, grab the goodies fast." "Go ahead of me," he said to his men. "Take all the things, capture all the women and the children, and take them to our kingdom." The women who had been taught to believe that they were not important did not resist the attack. They just held on to their children as the dwarf warriors herded them out of the kingdom. The strongest dwarf warriors quickly grabbed the royal stool. It was so heavy that 4 men had to carry it. Then 2 of them grabbed the royal sword. Now all they had to do was grab the royal drum, but it was nowhere to be found. "Don't worry," said the dwarf king. "Go ahead with what you have. I'll surely find the royal drum and bring it home." Chapter 6. What the dwarf king did not know was that Panin and Kakra had not followed the women and children. Actually, as soon as they saw the men beginning to fall asleep, they knew that something was up. Then when they saw the dwarfs snatch the stool and the sword, they knew that the next thing they would reach out for would be the drum. They also knew that if the dwarfs took all 3 of the items, the Ashanti kingdom would no longer be powerful in the eyes of its neighbors. They were very smart girls. They did not have the physical strength to match the dwarfs, but they had wit. In all the times that they had been kept behind the scenes and considered unimportant, they had been learning all about the history and ways of their people and those around it. They knew that in the land of the dwarfs, it was forbidden for a man to take a drum while a female was sitting on it. As soon as Panin saw the dwarf king aiming for the drum, she sat on it and crossed her legs. The dwarf king was so surprised to see her sit on the drum so fast. "Get up, silly girl," he yelled, but she pretended as if she had not heard. She did not even bother to look at him. The dwarf king tried many things to get her off the drum. "Look, look," he yelled, "there comes a big bad monster. It's coming to bite you," he said as he growled madly. He thought Panin would be scared and run away, but she wasn't scared at all. He tried another trick. "Do you smell something delicious?" he asked. "I smell a delicious meal of fufu and green soup with grass cutter and snails and crabs and salted fish." It was as if he knew that that was her favorite food. He hoped that it would make Panin hungry and go off to get some meal so he would grab the drum. However, she did not budge. Next, he tickled her, but she giggled and wiggled with her buttock firmly perched on the drum that the dwarf king soon became tired of that trick. "All right, go on, sit there like a statue. I have all the time in the world for you," he said, looking quite disappointed. "Just to let you know, the potion that I have given to your men would make them sleep for 3 whole days. There would be no one to come and help you. Very soon you will be tired and sleepy." Panin hardly said a word. The Dwarf King sat in front of the drum and waited and waited. He waited and waited, and waited and waited, and waited and waited, till it was morning. Chapter 7. Then he waited and waited until it was afternoon. Panin was growing tired, but she held on. Soon the Dwarf King began to feel sleepy. He yawned and stretched in the hope of not falling asleep. However, you know how sleep is. Before he knew what was happening, he was fast asleep. Panin, who was very tired, gave a little cough. Kakra woke up from her nap and ran to take her place. The Dwarf King woke up soon after, looking all around him. When did he sleep? Surely the girl was tired. She must have fallen asleep. But when he turned to look at her, she was sat right there on the drum, as awake as ever. He was beginning to feel hungry, but he did not want to get up from watching the girl. So he waited and waited, and waited and waited till it was night. The girl did not budge. She just sat and sang some melodious tunes. Still, the dwarf waited, and waited and waited, till it was midnight. Then he began to feel all drowsy again. He promised he would not sleep again, but as usual, sleep has a way of creeping up on you. Soon he was snoring away. Kakra gave a little cough, and Panin, who had woken up, eaten, and refreshed herself, ran to her and took over. Of course, it was very difficult for the Dwarf King to tell the difference between the two girls. Even their mother sometimes made mistakes telling them apart, and she had been with them their whole life. It was even difficult for him to know that there were two girls at all. When the dwarf woke up, he was so hungry and grumpy. Besides, it was already 2 days since he started waiting for the drum. He had only 1 day left if he was to go ahead with his plan. He tried to stay awake for as long as he could by chewing on kola nuts. But sleep is sleep, and when it comes, it comes. Soon he was snoring. As soon as he dozed off, Panin gave a little cough so Kakra could take over. However, Kakra was so tired that she had fallen into a very deep sleep. Panin coughed again, but Kakra snuggled into the cover cloth, turned around and slept some more. Panin coughed even louder. That was when Kakra heard it. She scrambled up clumsily and ran towards the drum. But the cough was so strong that the Dwarf King had also heard it in his sleep. He opened his eyes in time to see the twins exchanging places. "Ooh," he said. "So, there are two of you. I thought there was something fishy going on, and I was right. I wondered how you were keeping up." By now, Kakra had already sat on the drum. The Dwarf King dashed for Panin, tied her arms and legs, and then he carried her into one of the rooms. Now he was sure that things would be easy. Chapter 8. However, the twins were not only smart, they were also very brave. All the time Panin was in the room, she had looked around to see if there was anything she could use to cut the twine from around her arms and legs. The room was empty, but there was a sharp-looking stone near the door. She dragged herself on her buttocks until she was near the stone. Then she stretched with all her might until she could reach it with her mouth. Using her mouth, she tried to cut the twine that bound her leg. It was a very difficult thing to do, but she kept at it, trying and failing, but not giving up. Remember that time was not on her side. Besides, she was hungry. Also, she knew that Kakra would soon feel tired. The twine was very tight indeed, but Panin kept cutting it. Towards evening, she managed to cut the very last of the twine, and then she got up and peeked outside. The dwarf was still sitting on the ground and watching Kakra keenly. Kakra was yawning and stretching, and Panin knew that if she did not act fast, it would be bad for the kingdom. Chapter 9. She ran towards the wooded area where the men were sleeping on the ground. Then a good thing happened. She saw her father begin to stare. "Oh my God," she whispered. She was feeling hungry and tired, but she ran with all her strength. "Father," she whispered tiredly, "wake up, wake up. The kingdom is in danger." Her father rubbed his eyes and tried to open them. He was still feeling groggy. "What is happening?" he asked. Kakra told him all that had happened as quickly as she could. "Wake up! Wake up!" her father said, shaking some of his warriors. He told them to go after the dwarf army and rescue the women and children who had been captured. Then he ran to fight the evil dwarf king. It was a bitter fight indeed. The dwarf king was very tricky. He used all the tricks in the book. At last, the Ashanti king caught him as he kicked and scratched. He bound the dwarf king and put him in prison. Towards midnight, the warriors returned with all the women and wealth that the dwarf warriors had stolen. What rejoicing there was afterwards. The king asked the drummer to beat the drum. Then he made a very important announcement. This is what he said. "I would like to honor two very important girls today." And then he went on to tell of what Panin and Kakra had done. "I am so proud of them," he said. "This means that women are not as silly as we thought before. Rather, they are clever, smart, brave, and strong. From today onwards, they shall advise the king and be part of decision making." All the women broke into a cheer. The strong men carried Panin and Kakra on their shoulders and paraded them all around the kingdom as everyone cheered for them. The end.
Seniwa 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 Seniwa